Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 30th of April 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, Greenheart Studios combats piracy with more piracy. We will find out how that happened a little bit later on. EVE Online will be getting its own TV show, and in a new feature for Content Patch, we're going to be looking at some releases for this week. After that, of course, we will be rounding off the show with your OC Remix track of the day. Now, there are days when there are really interesting stories involved in this particular industry of ours, and this, I think, has to qualify. An independent developer by the name of Greenheart Games recently released a title called Game Dev Tycoon. Now, this in itself is not a particularly unusual thing to actually happen. However, what ended up occurring was they found that 94% of their first day downloads of Game Dev Tycoon were pirated. Again, even that isn't that unusual, as sad as it is. The unusual thing is that the reason it was pirated in the first place is because they were the ones that put the version up to begin with. So they decided to release the title on Windows, Mac, and Linux, but also put a cracked version of the game up on a popular torrent site. What then occurred is that players eventually discovered that the cracked version of the game was booby-trapped. It was sabotaged, and what would eventually happen is your virtual game studio that you were playing within the game would go bankrupt from piracy. Now, the interesting thing about this, of course, is the reactions of people that played it. They had absolutely no idea that this was happening, and as a result, they were posting to various forums, including the Steam forums, which is extremely strange considering the game isn't actually out on Steam yet, saying, "Help, I can't actually progress further." There were others saying, "Can I research DRM to help actually fix this?" Oh, that is delicious. It is delicious, isn't it? Now, Greenheart claimed that the reason they did this was to actually highlight an important problem within the industry, especially affecting indie developers, that piracy can really hurt. And what better venue to do it than in a game about developing video games? Makes perfect sense, really. They also claimed that they actually had some anonymous tracking tools within the game, which is in itself a little bit... I don't necessarily like that, but apparently it was covered by the terms of service, claiming that that would allow them to check which was a legitimate version and which wasn't, and it came to the conclusion that after the first day, there were 3,104 users of the game that were using the cracked version, and only 214 people using the legitimate version. Now, of course, this has significantly increased because this story is now all over the internet, so you can safely say that this experiment was something of a success for them. And that follows in the footsteps of other indie titles like Anodyne, as well as Hotline Miami, that also got a lot of publicity surrounding the piracy. The idea that the Hotline Miami dev actually went and fixed the pirated version because he didn't want people playing a broken game, and so on and so forth. That's the kind of thing which engenders goodwill with the community and actually gets the attention of news organizations as well, so it gives more promotion to the game. Now, you could say that this was a ghetto form of promotion. It's a very unusual way of doing things, and I think that it's the right set of circumstances. You're making a game about developing video games. It's the perfect opportunity to throw in some trap regarding actual piracy for people that pirated the game. What a great time to do that, right? Makes perfect sense. In any other title, this probably wouldn't have worked. I don't know, maybe a hacking game. That's a possibility there, but for the most part, you're not going to be able to get the same results with a game that isn't about developing video games. Some would claim that it's ham-fisted. I don't think so. I think it's cute, and I also think that it does raise a fairly valid point. The game itself actually makes it very clear that developing video games is not actually that profitable. You can have a couple of hits in your garage, but when you actually try and start to create a development house and you have an office and you hire people to work for you, and you have to take publishing deals where you get paid very poor royalties and also get penalized based on Metacritic score, you end up in a situation where you're just barely treading water, even if you're making amazing video games. That is representative of the industry as a whole. Indeed, the game does reflect the state of the industry quite nicely at times, although it does miss the mark on others. But at this point, there's no question whatsoever that Greenheart will have got so much publicity by this that they will end up in a situation where they're going to sell a whole bunch of copies. The funny thing is, I have a feeling their sales figures would have been way different if the game was actually on Steam. This game was released in a really gnarly way, and I say that simply because it wasn't on any popular digital distribution site. Any of them. You could buy it directly from them, or alternatively, you could get it from the Microsoft Store, which is really only accessible through Windows 8, or at least that's the only kind of people that actually use it. So, you end up in a nasty spot where nobody knows that your game exists. That's not so good, and in that situation, you need a little bit of guerrilla marketing like this. I don't know if that's a sustainable business model. In fact, I would say that it's not, and they probably got pretty lucky with how this ended up working out. There's no question that in this case, Game Dev Tycoon clearly benefits from the piracy, although there are no doubt many instances where this does not occur. It's unfortunate, though, isn't it, that if a game isn't on Steam, it just doesn't sell all that well. There are a few small exceptions, stuff like Minecraft, obviously, but most games just don't sell well until they get on Steam. It's pretty hard to judge exactly how extreme that is. We don't get that many sales figures to really explain just how many sales are from Steam and how many sales are outside of Steam. There are very rare occurrences where we actually gain a glimpse of that, and they're so few and far between, it's very difficult to really build a picture, but what we are seeing, in my honest opinion, is clearly a case where most of the sales happen on Steam. An example would be Witcher 2, fairly early on with Witcher 2. 35,000 copies initially sold on GOG, 10,000 copies combined between Direct-to-Drive, Impulse, and Gamersgate, and 200,000 copies on Steam. So you can look at the percentages there, and obviously, since then, it's sold way, way more copies. There's also a nice little breakdown of Defender's Quest. So what happened with Defender's Quest is that 58.6% of sales were on Steam, 0.3% from Impulse and Desura, and 8.5% from GOG, with 24% of sales being direct. It's not bad for direct sales, actually. That's probably one of the better examples we get, but you can still see the lion's share is from Steam. If you don't have Steam, then in and of itself, you don't get that advertising. People don't know that your game exists. Steam is not just a store, it's a giant advertising platform. If something is on the front page of Steam, whether it be under new releases or the big banners at the top, then that is going out to millions of people a day. Millions. That is one of the biggest pieces of advertising you could possibly ask for, and that's what Steam provides. So if you don't have access to being able to sell your game through Steam, you are, unfortunately, in a little bit of trouble there. There's also one other thing I'd like to address, and that is the notion that it is hypocritical to complain about copying because, in fact, game developer Tycoon is very similar to a game called Game Dev Story that was created by Kairosoft and released in 2010 on mobile platforms. So I've done a comparison between the two games, and there are definitely some marked similarities. That said, it also has some fairly key mechanical differences. The question, I suppose, then becomes, where do you draw the line when it comes to the difference between cloning and iteration? Iteration is a vital part of our industry to the point where genres exist to support it, and consumers repeatedly support iteration with their purchases, and cloning is, of course, a harmful activity which involves the wholesale copying of the game, sometimes with a different coat of paint. A clone would be ninja fishing versus radical fishing. It would be Vlambeer's Luftkrausers versus Skyfar. These are clones. Either they wholesale copy the entire game, or they even wholesale copy the assets from it. And Skyfar, for instance, looks extremely similar, as well as, of course, copying the game mechanics. And then you've got iteration. And what is iteration? Well, look at how FPS evolved from Doom. Look at how many games were called Doom clones and then eventually built into a genre. It's important to note that because of the cloning, quote-unquote, as it was called back in the day of Doom, even though it technically wasn't cloning at all, it was the notion of taking certain game mechanics and styles and building a new game upon them with a different theme. That allowed the FPS genre to exist. In the case of Game Dev Story, it's a game that came out 3 years ago. There is a Game Dev Story 2, but it hasn't been translated into English yet. That was actually a PC game there. I think that Game Dev Tycoon probably brings enough new stuff to justify not calling it a straight-out clone, although there are no doubts that that game is very similar to Game Dev Story. I think, though, if you want to call that a clone, then you've got to go even further than that and say, oh, well, Roller Coaster Tycoon shouldn't exist because of theme park. No, that would be bad for the industry, wouldn't it? Roller Coaster Tycoon is, as far as I'm concerned, a better game than Theme Park, yet exists because a lot of stuff in that game was based on Theme Park in and of itself. It's important that we have an industry where it is okay to clone major game mechanics as well as you iterate and enhance upon them. I suppose it's the difference between Skyfar and Muffin Night, isn't it? Although, I'd say the Game Dev Tycoon is more different from Game Dev Story than Muffin Night is from Super Crate Box. I think it's going to have to come down to your individual morals. Some of you will be offended by the notion that this game copies another game in many respects, and as such you will not buy it. But as a result, I would suggest that you stop buying games that are in the same genre, because they often do very much the same thing. On the other side, some people just won't care, and they'll enjoy the game for what it is. And in terms of what the game actually is, I did a pretty long live stream on this. I've kind of come to the conclusion that I don't know if the game's actually any good, but the theme carries it, and I want to play it because it allows me to fulfill this little fantasy that most games don't actually let you do. Doesn't mean it's a good game, but it's got a great theme, and it seems to be a good time waster. Speaking of time waster, EVE Online! No, seriously, it's a giant time sink. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's a great MMO and it's extremely successful, but my god is that game a time sink. I actually only played it for a few months, I think, and in the time that I actually played it, I was investing a lot of time into that game, but that's MMOs in a nutshell. Now, the news about EVE is that there is going to be a television series, supposedly, based on the EVE universe. It's currently in development with an Icelandic filmmaker, whose name I'm probably going to mangle, goes by the name of Baltasar Kormakur. Possibly. I don't know. One way or the other, he is getting on board with this, and his production company is responsible for this particular series. They stated that it will be an original concept and storyline set in the EVE universe, although CCP has encouraged players to submit stories of things that have happened to them in the game in order to inspire episodes of that particular series. The director stated that the opportunity to interact with the fans of the EVE universe directly opens up all sorts of exciting possibilities. The website in question is truestories.eveonline.com, which is supposedly something that will inspire comics, television series, films, and books set in the EVE universe, so the actual website claims. And there's a whole bunch of really awesome stuff that's been submitted there. I think the thing about EVE Online, of course, is that a lot of people really like to read about EVE, they just don't want to play it. I love reading about the intrigue and crazy heists and events that go on in the EVE universe. I just have no desire to participate in any of them. So that's cool. There are very few MMOs and games that actually have that kind of a following outside of the game. So something like a television series would work. Admittedly, it's rather odd to suggest that you can create a lot of drama surrounding a series whereby the main characters are immortal. That's the thing. A traditional television series, a drama, would be based around a certain set of characters. The drama and the tension often surrounds the notion that these people may not survive or that bad things will happen to them. When you're immortal and you just reappear inside a new clone after you die, it's pretty difficult to create a scenario where that would actually work. Can you really make a tense series out of the idea that someone might lose some assets in space? Because that's, let's be honest, what EVE is actually all about. That's going to be a big challenge. I think it's a good universe to set something in, although I have the feeling that if this ends up being low budget, we will be very disappointed with the outcome. Considering the quality of some of the material that's been created by CCP itself in terms of its computer-generated trailers, particularly the new EVE Origins trailer, which looks absolutely fantastic, I would hope the series apes that. But I'm not entirely convinced. Will they use in-game assets? It would be really damn cool if they did. I think they look good enough to justify it. But if they decide to go for full-on CG, I don't know. It's definitely risky, but it's cool that it's happening. There's no real question about that. I'm just concerned that it might not work out all that well. Alright, let's do a new segment of the show. I don't really know why we didn't do this anyway, because releases are news in and of themselves, but when I do that, I would like to make sure that everyone knows what releases are coming out this week, and so on and so forth. So, Tuesday seems like a good time to actually do that. That's the usual time for US releases to come out, and then you can assume that those releases will come out on either Thursday or Friday in Europe and the UK. That is usually about right, although there are some exceptions. So, let's get on the list, shall we? Let's find out what's actually going on. So, a few releases actually came out today, something you want to be paying attention to. We had the Steam version of Receiver come out. That was a game that I did do a WTF Viz of. You can go and check that one out. As far as I know, it's pretty much the same as the one that I showed you. It's a couple of dollars. It's an interesting concept, but as a game, isn't exactly something that I would say is really worthy of a lot of time from you. It's a cool experiment, something to try out. Leviathan Warships comes out today as well on PC. It is scheduled for release on other platforms as well, Mac, tablets, and so on and so forth. It is a $10 turn-based futuristic ship combat game, and it's looking rather awesome. I'll be trying that out fairly shortly. That's available on Steam as well as Gamersgate. Xenoclash 2 is out today, priced at $20 or your regional equivalent. That is also out on Steam. That is the sequel to the original Xenoclash, which was a first-person brawler, which involved beating up things. It's very hard to explain what they were. Alien birdmen, strange creatures, and so on and so forth. Also, we have the release of Jack Lumber, which is a game from Alchemy. Now, Alchemy are possibly the best-named studio of all time. They are responsible for another game by the name of Snuggle Truck. Oh, Christ. Oh, man. I'm gonna have to try this one out, aren't I? Yes, apparently so. That is currently out today as well. And Strike Suit Infinity, which is, you might think, a sequel to Strike Suit Zero. Not entirely true. Strike Suit Infinity is a score attack version of Strike Suit Zero. It's significantly cheaper in price. It's got the same kind of mechanics as Strike Suit Zero, but it is in fact a cut down version. Currently, it's actually 50% off, which is quite surprising. It only just came out. It will cost you only a few dollars, so it may very well be worthy of your time there. And once again, it actually goes down the route of what I was saying on the Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon video. The idea of taking existing assets, turning them into a smaller, more digestible and cheaper product is often a very good idea to bring people into your franchise. Other big releases that are coming out this week: Soul Sacrifice and Deadly Premonition Director's Cut come out today. Soul Sacrifice is for PlayStation Vita, Deadly Premonition Director's Cut for PlayStation 3. Soul Sacrifice is looking to be a potential killer app there for the PlayStation Vita. It is a third-person action RPG that is based in a very dark and weird world where you must make offerings to maintain your sorceress powers. It is pretty good from what I can tell. It's very Monster Hunter-esque. In terms of Deadly Premonition, I'm not entirely convinced the game's actually any good, but it has developed a cult following. There's no real question about that. Fez also comes out for PC today, if you're interested in that. Personally, I got off the Fez bandwagon a long time ago, so I don't really know whether or not I am actually going to even bother playing that one. Honestly, it seems like the whole story and the mythos surrounding it has very much evaporated over time, so it's not really worthy of my attention. Plus, I don't like puzzle platformers anyway. Also, 3DSware, something actually worthy paying attention to. That's coming out on May the 2nd, that being the Denpa 2 Beyond the Waves. A very strange game indeed. Denpa was surprisingly cool. It's a rather strange RPG. I would strongly suggest that you have a look at that. Also on May the 5th for 3DS, we have Mario and Donkey Kong Minis on the Move, which is a first-party title, which means it's coming out on a Sunday in the US for some strange reason. That happens to be what they tend to do. There you go, folks. There's a roundup of the forthcoming releases coming your way this week. I'll do another one of these every Tuesday. And finally, time for a little bit of OC Remix action, I think. What we're going to play today? Well, there's all sorts of different choices available, so let's delve back into the era of the Super Nintendo with a game called Donkey Kong Country, one of my personal favorite platformers. A strange one indeed, because I never really played it when it came out. It didn't have a Super Nintendo, but I went back later on and revisited it and found that it was a game that I very much liked. So, the artist for this particular title goes by the name of Blind, and he made a track called Blue Vision. Now, Blue Vision is a remix of Aquatic Ambience, which is a great track from Donkey Kong Country, and I think you'll enjoy this one a lot. My name's been TotalBiscuit. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.